This is the first time that Craig ever wanted to have a meeting with me. He left this on my desk.
What is that?
It's a polished Oregon River rock with fool's gold in it.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
And so when Craig wanted a meeting with you, he would leave that on your desk. And I have two of them that I've hung on to.
That's
It's
awesome.
one of my favorite things that I've kept in my whole life from my snowboarding life is this right here. It's kind of a cherished thing.
So cool.
Yeah.
Okay, Doyle.
Hi, Trisha.
Hi. Thanks for joining me and Jennifer on this podcast. And you have been around for so long in the industry, but also specifically around the Burton and Craig R&D lab. So I wanted to kind of pick your brain on a couple stories that you had shared with me earlier, and anything else you want to share. But specifically, you mentioned this story about, I
Oh,
wanted to
no.
talk about how the riders were such a big part of product development, especially with bindings.
Hmm.
And, you had a great story about Terje and the freestyle binding.
Yeah. At Burton, the riders, they really did. Jake really truly believed that the riders were, listen to the riders, and kind of goes back to Craig really brought that to Jake. He was kind of like, if you pay attention to the riders, and this predated me at Burton when I started just traveling to contests with Grindrite, and just showed up at the, 93 US Open with my Black & Decker workmate and a couple of stickers and some wax and an iron and, fully expecting to get thrown out any second. I went into the guys at Stratton Mountain Sports, and maybe I'm digressing here a little bit, but I went in there and I was like, hey, can you guys let me plug in my power cord here? There's nothing outside, I'm not trying to take any of your business. I'm just going to work with the pro riders, and they were like, wait, you mean you'll keep those guys out of here? And I said, yeah. And they're like, you can have anything you want. So, the US Open wasn't exactly very popular amongst the skiers back then at Stratton, and probably never
Totally.
was. And, but that's where I got my start to really working with the best riders in the sport in the freestyle side of things and tuning their boards and everything, because that was kind of what Grindrite was all about. But at the same time, bringing that skill set that I had developed working up at Sugarbush in the shop to helping them with their bindings and their boots. A lot of times guys and girls showed up at contests and either stuff was busted, screws were missing.
Yeah.
I saw bindings, so many bindings held together with duct tape and ticket wickets, which, the Utes of the world don't know what a ticket wicket is anymore, but the
Yeah.
ticket wicket was a very important repair item on broken bindings back in the day. And so I would do the best that I could to help these riders and, help them out with their gear. Sometimes their boots wouldn't fit. Sometimes maybe the way their high backs were, they just weren't comfortable with it. And so I would make adjustments and everything on the fly for them there at the same time as tuning their boards.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy looking back at some of the old content and footage. I was looking at an old Burton catalog and looking at the amount of duct tape that was showcased in the catalog.
In the
This is like Mike
catalog.
Jacoby. It's like there's duct tape all over his boots and bindings. You're like, buy these.
Yes, and it's so true. And I guess that probably does go back to why, the golden roll of duct tape is the thing at the Baker Bank Slalom. That's like the best prize you could possibly ever win in all of snowboarding to this day. And I believe that comes from that time. People's bindings and boots were just festooned with duct tape. I wasn't there at the time, but I saw pictures of Terry Kidwell where when he was first putting stiffeners in the backs of his boots to have a high back of some nature that wasn't external, that was all wrapped in with duct tape.
Yeah.
Craig developed the Kelly tongue with duct tape. Yeah, duct tape was the thing, which is fun because out in the snow and the cold, the only thing that duct tape really wants to stick to is itself. And so it's kind of a real drag to try to use duct tape, out in snow. It doesn't really want to stick to anything. So that was quite a trip. And so those first few contests working with the riders as the sport was just, in the early 1990s, just explosively growing. And the crazy thing is from one contest year to the next, the level of riding and the level of the pipes just grew exponentially. One year, riders are going 8 feet out, and the next year they were going 14. Okay. And then the
Yeah, it's
following
crazy.
year, they were just going suborbital. It was crazy. And so trying to learn and keep up with the rider's progression in the line of equipment was really something. And so I had the privilege to start working with Haaken. I believe it was either the 95 or the 96 US Open. That was the first time I ever tuned his board. And I really didn't do much with his bindings except for just make sure that all of his screws were tight and make sure that nothing was broken. And he wasn't using at the time the new Burton custom bindings. He liked the old freestyles because they were a bit stiffer. The custom freestyle binding was very comfortable, but it was too soft for him. And the high back was too low. Terje liked high backs with forward lean. And he liked them to be tall because, I mean, that guy was a carver. It still is. And so the high back and the boot together to give him that power on a heel side turn was super important to him. And so for him, we built special stiffer discs and I built like taller high backs for him. And then we built a specially made carbon fiber high back for him, which I still have, which I could show you if you'd like.
Yeah. Also, was that the sort of advent of the Skyback or?
Yeah, that was actually in the Skyback was not only Terje, but that was Joe Curtes and Dave Downing.
Oh, sweet.
Okay. And it's so funny because Downing at the time, he liked low backs. He rode no backs. Dave was a real gibber. And then all of a sudden, boy, it was Skyback. And I remember when we were prototyping the Skyback and we were trying to figure out what to call it. And Dave was like, let's just call it the high back. So that was the working name for it. It had about 25 I's in the name, So this was the carbon fiber high back on the freestyle tray that we built for Terje. And you can see the forward lean. Okay. It was huge. But this was the high back was super stiff, yet the tray still had that kind of flexibility for the rider. And at the time, Terje didn't trust slap ratchets. It was a great innovation for Burton, but they also had some design flaws in them, which is why most of them broke. And so that was another one of my challenges when Burton hired me, was to be working with the riders and try to figure out ways to take products that we had and improve upon them so that they were more reliable.
Yeah.
So we completely redesigned the custom freestyle base plate to be much more robust. It looked blocky and chunky, but I bet the warranty department a case of beer that they wouldn't find one broken globally in the first year. And the entire warranty department in the springtime came running up to my desk one day, and they had one in their hand that looked like it had been run over by a snowcat. Okay. And they were like, we win.
Give us our beer.
Exactly. I consider that to be a moral victory. So,
Totally.
But at the same time, we built that base plate to be really robust and it didn't break, but it was really soft. Okay. So for the top pros, it was a bit too soft and they were asking for a stiffer base plate. I mean, one time Cebu was at a contest and he threw one of his great tweaked out Cebu methods and he got his thumb stuck under the base plate of the binding because it had flexed up so much. And when he landed, it just came down on his thumb and trapped it there. And so
he's really locking in that grab for the whole run.
That was it. He was stuck in it. And so that's when we started building stiffer base plates for the riders that were, again, trying to keep up with this rider progression and, working a lot with Terje, working a lot with Victoria and Nicole and Leslie Olson and Orly Sayers and all these great women and men riders from back then. It was just
they
really
all had
fun.
like slightly different needs, but just wanted the product to perform. Yeah.
Correct. The women's side of things, the women desperately just wanted things to fit because basically the women had to ride medium bindings. The medium binding fit you and your boot fairly well. But for a lot of the women that were size 6s and size 7s, and
which
Vic
was like
was
most
one
of them. Yeah.
Most of them, they were a little bit loose. So I ended up doing a lot of work padding out women's bindings and also doing a lot of boot fitting work to make the boots and everything fit women's physiology.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me that story about like getting a plane ticket and a da da
Oh
da.
yeah. Uh, that was just so insane. It's to this day, it was really just absolutely incredible. But I came to work one morning. I had been at Burton. I started at Burton in February of '96, and I came in, I don't know, to my desk. It was one day in early May or something like that. And sitting on my desk is a plane ticket to Zurich, a check for $1,000 for spending cash, a rental car voucher, and a hand scrawled note that said, "Go to Zurich, pick up Terje, Sione, and Ari. Take them to Rato's camp in Pontresina. Don't come back until he's happy with his bindings." And I was just like, wow.
You're like, dream job, check.
Right? I mean, wow. To this day, I was just like, wow. And I remember writing in my little notebook, wow. And so for the next 3 weeks, it was a scramble to get all that ready. And because, of course, the boot team was like, oh, you're taking these boots. He's going to try all these different boots. And Terje had a size 10 and a half foot. But back then, because his boards are so narrow, he was cramming his foot into a size 9 boot.
Oh my
okay.
gosh.
And which, didn't do him any favors with his ankles and his hips.
And his toes.
Yeah, well, that's it. Everything was just so crunched up in there. So I was working with his boots to try to like make it so that small footprint that he wanted on his really narrow board would all work.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I took all kinds of different bindings, pieces and parts, and carried a ton of boards with me because the board team wanted me to check out all these boards and a bunch of different pairs of boots. I mean, I traveled with like 3 different board bags and 2 double-decker wheelies, all just crammed with stuff, and flew to Zurich. Those guys, they all showed up a couple of hours after I did. And it was really kind of funny because they were all sort of like, they really didn't know me very well or anything like that. And they were kind of hazing me a bit. And they all stood back like this,
Like, what are you going to do for us, buddy?
Leather jacket and everything. And all their gear is like piled, in front of me. And they were like, all right, what are you going to do? And I made sure that I brought with me like ratchet tie down straps and all kinds of other stuff. And within 10 minutes, I had the whole thing piled on top of the rented Jetta station wagon. And I was like, get in. And they were like, okay, this guy's,
legit.
He's kind of got something going here. So, and that was wonderful. We drove out to Pontresina, and it was probably about 3 weeks out there. And they were
Was it
filming
hard to
subject.
work with them, or like
Could be.
to like to figure out the product in the moment,
Yeah, well, especially because, Terje still didn't know me very well. And so, sometimes he would be kind of open and willing to talk. And other times, he was just kind of like, leave me alone. We're going to go skate, and I would just, and those moments, though, that's when we were up on the mountain during the day, I would just watch him ride, have stuff with me if you wanted to try it. But other than that, no pressure. I'm just watching you ride. Okay. And to be able to watch him and really learn, body motions and kind of really what worked for him, like little things that I would note that he had very specific places that he would put his fingers as he rode pipe. It was just like little things. And this was something that I kind of liked, that I got pretty good at, was being able to really observe riders and some of their nuances, and how those nuances let me know whether they were comfortable or whether they were struggling. And that was really kind of neat to learn that stuff.
Yeah.
And part of that trip was just to get him to be comfortable with me, because he definitely hazed me a little bit too, because anybody that was around him, he hazed Sione, but Sione was like the scoutmaster. He wasn't taking any shit from anybody. And so he'd be the one that would get in there and kick him out of bed in the morning. And, Dave was like, Haaken, get up. We got to go ride. Get up. And
I feel like those bindings, like the skybacks and that sort of, I talked to Neary a while, like a while ago, and he was saying like, yeah, they were riding, like kind of what you're saying about Dave Downing, which is like they're riding baseless or low backs, right, and kind of like that whole skate style. And then like seeing Terje ride with a aggressive forward lean and a high back like that, it just shifted the mindset of like, oh, if you want to go big, you need that support, right?
Right. You needed to be able to hold speed. I mean, specifically in Terrier's, half pipe contest and everything, and Sean White kind of took this, and so did Kelly. Kelly
Yeah.
Clark, you watch Kelly ride. The speed that she held in the pipe was insane. And
Yeah.
the fact that they carved down the walls of the pipe like gate bangers, like
Yeah.
racers. They held an edge, and that was where that speed and that power came from. And Terje was the same way. The guy had kind of this racing background, and he could hold speed, but he needed that high back to get that board to really set there on the heel side turn down through the bottom of the pipe. And
Yeah.
so, yes, it was kind of a crazy thing that changed everything for a little while. High backs just became really tall, and the skyback itself was really tall. And we only made the skyback, I think, for 1 or 2 years, and then it kind of came back just a little bit.
What is the primo, where have we landed on the high back?
I don't think we've really landed in any one spot. I still think that it changes year to year.
Okay.
I don't know. Now, again, I'm not so into it these days as I was in the past. Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't pay as close attention to it as I used to.
Me neither.
What I'm seeing, though, a lot of, in many instances, because of the way the industry now is, being radical and changing aggressively is not something that I think a lot of companies are really into.
They can't afford to.
They can't afford to, number one, but also, and we sort of learned this at Burton. Sometimes when you would really go kind of radical and put a real radical product on the shelf, people are kind of like, I hate to say it, but snowboarders, like skateboarders, pretty conservative, like a skateboard.
They don't like change.
They do not like change, and they're somewhat conservative. Some riders really embraced, the new and the forward thinking and everything, and others, really wanted the stuff that they knew that worked for them. Okay,
Yeah.
Which is why it took so long for Terje to come around to, some of the new bindings and everything. It took me probably 3 or 4 years to get him to finally accept slap ratchets as being okay. They're going to hold and they're going to work for you. And they had to go to metal for that to happen, for him to be really comfortable with it.
Interesting.
And then he was good with it. So where have we landed right now? I'm glancing through some of the products that are on the shelves right now. A lot of it is about ID and style. Okay. I think the heights are about mid-height. They want them to be comfortable. Okay. The one thing about the skyback was, for the ordinary rider with that kind of forward lean, it hurt.
I love those. Those are I have a tall high back, I want to ride pipe. I want to ride aggressively, same as those guys.
You want to know who really, really liked the tall high backs? Barrett.
Oh, Barrett. She's so little.
Right. And
they're actually thigh backs. They're not skybacks.
They were. I was making Barrett, I was like, I got some small skybacks for you. She's like, no, I want the taller ones. And so I would make Barrett these bindings with these high backs that went almost up to the inside of the back of her knee, like that Nike commercial where she jumped off the building.
The building, yeah.
And the bindings with the red high backs, I built those. And yeah, it was just really fun. She was like, yep. She didn't run as much forward lean, but she really liked the height of the high back. And so that kind of took a step back. Also, not only the high back changing, and also the high backs went to really stiff, and then they kind of started to go back to being a little bit softer and more comfortable, because for most riders, being comfortable out on the mountain is, that's the 80th percentile,
Yeah, the consumer wants comfort for sure.
After
Hence
the
the
super
step
soft
on.
custom freestyle base plate, we went to a stiffer material. We started using glass loaded base plate materials. And so we went from this binding that, the base plate flexed a lot and everything, but boy, it just would not break. Okay. And then the experimental glass loaded bindings, I was out at Hood and I gave a set to Ben Hinckley. And, I was like, Ben, just do me a favor. Go just rip some turns, maybe a couple little jumps. Just tell me how you like the feel. And he's like, yeah, sure. Big smile, Ben, and all of a sudden I look over and I see him. There's two guys with cameras below the biggest jump. Okay. And he just points it and sends it and throws his lawn dart. You know, that move that he had where he's just like off the jump, hands to his side, head first, straight off the thing, late front flip and landed. Okay. And I just watched him disappear beyond the edge of the jump. And then I just heard everybody scream like, whoa. And basically both of his bindings just literally exploded into 100 pieces. Okay. Because the material was just too brittle. And he comes back up with this giant smile on his face. He was totally cool with it, but literally hands me these bindings like, well, there you go. And so this was before cell phones, and I'm down on the payphone in the parking lot at, Highcast at Timberline Lodge for the engineers back in Burton going like, okay, explain to me again why this is better. So we went through a lot of that in order to test and get things correct and everything. And this is, again, how working with the riders really got us there. Working with the riders.
Yeah.
For me, working with the riders was very, very, very important. As time has gone on, I believe it's gone less away from people being comfortable being out on snow and working with riders in their environment to bringing the riders into the industrial designers, the product developers, the product managers. They bring them into their environment. I've never done a podcast in my life. This is a first for me.
Oh, really? You have so much intel and insight and knowledge.
I love to chat. It's really kind of fun because, I don't know, those of us that were kind of, on the other side of the wall, if you will, those stories are out there, and there's an awful lot of fun people to talk to that have spent their whole careers trying to make snowboarding better. And I'm just one of them,
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there that probably have great fun stories and
a million,
and either can add to what I have to say or basically like, hey dude, you're full of shit.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about like the patent process. When you're doing R&D, it feels like the bindings come out, they've been out for X amount of years, and then a patent is instituted. It feels a little retroactive.
It totally is, because the R&D and the development and everything happens very quickly to and then the product happens, but the patent is usually filed, and that's done. It was kind of funny, like it was nothing that I ever said. I'm like working on something, I'm like, ooh, we're gonna patent this. You never did that. You'd be working on something, and all of a sudden one day, the whole crew from the legal department and, one of your bosses and everything would show up in the workshop with a bunch of paperwork, and they'd be like, okay, look this over. Does this make sense? All right, sign here. Here's $1. And then it would go into the patenting process through an external law firm that, this is at least how it happened at Burton, an external law firm that we had that would write all the super arcane details of the patent claims and everything, and then it would go to the U.S. Patent Office, and then it would be reviewed there, and then eventually, if everything was considered unique enough, it was granted a patent. And so that's kind of how the whole patent process worked. My very first patent, amongst other things that were wrapped into that patent, though, was the internal sliding adjuster on straps. Okay. And I started working on that project because in a meeting with Jake one time, he holds up a binding where we're still bolting the straps onto the outside of the binding. And he was like, can't we do something about this? This is like so old school. Like, let's just do something about this. And so I was kind of like, all right. And I went to work on it. And so eventually that got wrapped into a patent on another whole strap system and everything that we did. But that was where that patent changed the whole way that we mounted straps to base plates. And then that allowed us to start experimenting and making, let's say, the slot wall base plate where the end of the strap was tucked into the base plate like this. And it looked a lot cleaner and nicer. And then all you had to do was use a single screwdriver to adjust your straps, which nobody did, but we had the strap adjustment process available. And that's another funny thing. There was so many things that we did to the binding to make them super adjustable and super customizable and everything. And about 99.5% of anybody that ever pulled a binding out of the box wrote it as it came out of the box. So we had all these adjustments.
Crazy.
Nobody used them. But I would use them at contests and everything for the riders. I'd be like, hey, here, try this. And and they'd be like, oh, wow, that's great. I'm like, yeah, high back rotation. It's kind of cool, and, but as far as,
Totally.
as far as the general riding public, I would just look at people's bindings, when I was out snowboarding, and they were straight out of the box. That's just how people rode them. And so over the years, as, things went on, people, the bosses and everything were like, we need to simplify these things. These base plates are too complicated. There's too much stuff. And so we started to de-feature bindings, which, I always laid down in front of the bulldozers on that. But a lot of times I lost those battles. So yeah, that was the patent process. It was really kind of neat. Like, you never knew what was going to be considered protectable, okay, and what was going to be considered intellectual property. But the bosses, they would figure that out, and then they'd come back and tell you that, yeah, that's what happened. And people used to ask me all the time, like, well, what do you get if you get a patent at Burton? Thinking that you got like $1 million or something stupid like that. And I'm like, no, maybe you get to come back to work tomorrow, because that technology was 1.5 years ago already. What have you done for me today? So that's how that worked out.
I saw that Jake has a patent for the releasable binding.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. And that patent has long since gone into the public domain. It's out there, but it's no longer a Burton patent. Okay. But so Miller had the releasable snowboard binding, okay, which he basically cobbed up from a failed ski binding. Okay. It was a binding that did not work well for skiers because it didn't work well in twist. And this goes back to my ski binding days, where I worked with a guy that used to do a lot of these testing on those and proved that binding was a lousy ski binding. But this guy was like, he turned it into a snowboard release binding. And basically it was a solution for a problem that didn't exist. Releasable ski bindings happened because of, the fact that people were breaking their legs in spiral twisting falls. There was no such thing in snowboarding. Okay. But he tried to get it required in snowboarding. Okay. So he would, his whole idea was to make a buck. And so there was the releasable binding. And so Jake's lead engineer at the time was a guy by the name of Dave Dodge. And Dave Dodge also came from the ski binding world. And they went to work on it, and they, in a way to sort of defend themselves against Miller, they created their own releasable binding and patented it.
I figured.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was a way. I was
like, there's no way Jake actually wanted this. It's just like, we're gonna stop you in your tracks, right?
That's right. Or at least give us a way to knuckle up with you. Yes. Okay. And so that's why that happened. I used to have for years, and I used to take it around on what we called super clinics, but it was a system where it was this whole cable system of prototype binding where it would release partially like this, and then it would come back down onto the board. And that was sort of a design that came from an old ski binding called the Burt. And the whole idea behind that was one of the biggest pains in the asses for skiers when their skis fell off was trying to get back into them. The bindings were really hard to get back into. So this system allowed the skier to partially release out of the binding, and then it would just automatically come back together. Okay.
Like, I'm going to die. Oh, no, I'm okay.
Oh, yeah, I'm back. Yeah, it was actually a really neat system, and I used to work on them a lot. They weighed a ton. I mean, oh, my God, these things were giant hunks of aluminum with these springs and gears and mechanisms and everything. And it was never really super commercially successful, but the oddball skiers would buy them. And so, again, Dave Dodge and his team, before I came to Burton, made a prototype of this thing and mounted it on an old M5 or M6 snowboard. And they actually took it out and tested it. And so I always used to carry that thing around with me when we'd go to clinics to say that, hey, this is also binding R&D. We do a lot of weird stuff just to try it. And that's one of the things that most people don't understand is how many things you try that don't make it. How many learning failures you go through.
Like the step on, like the step in was there in 93 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, like that was coming in,
Correct.
and then it went away and then came back, right? Like
Right. And so that was kind of an interesting thing where K2, to their
clicker.
credit, they worked with Shimano bicycle technology and they created the clicker. And even though if you've ever ridden one, and I don't care what E-Tree thinks or anything, I'm pretty sure to this day he's kind of like, yeah, they were pretty uncomfortable, but I made good money,
We love E-Tree.
love the man. And he made good money, riding them, as did other people. But they were the convenience binding and snowboarding was really great for a lot of riders. It never really caught on amongst the pros because it was stiff and it hurt and it was just not comfortable. What the step-in binding did, though, was it forced those of us working in soft strap bindings to make our binding systems much easier to use. Okay, so it forced us to make the strap binding system much more convenient. And we were always trying
That's
to
so
see.
interesting.
Yeah, it really forced us to make the strap binding much more convenient, much easier to use. Because in the old days, when all the straps and buckles and everything were flopping all over and people with giant mittens are trying to get their things together, we were always trying to make that easier. And at the same time, you'd see some poor sap at the top of the mountain on their step-in bindings that were frozen and they just couldn't get into them. Burton really tried hard, to like look the other way at the clicker because, again, we just didn't think that the pro riders would be into it. Again, rider driven. And
Yeah.
the very first step-in binding that Burton ever released was a hard boot system that was called Physics.
Oh.
And it was a really pretty clever design where all the mechanisms for it and everything were in the heel of the boot. And so you didn't have to bend over to get in and out of your bindings. You could run a release mechanism all the way up into the pocket of your pants. And that was really pretty neat system. Nobody remembers it. And, but it was a really pretty neat system. And that was the very first step-in system Burton ever released. And then the SI system came out the next year. And initially the SI system was very clicker-esque. It was just a small disc that was on the board with two little clips on either side. And then I started working with that team when I came on at Burton. And my opinion was, if we're going to make a snowboard binding has a high back on it. It doesn't have a high back in the boot.
Yeah.
Okay. Because then if you got a high back in the boot, you just made a ski boot. Okay. And so that was and that was an enormous struggle internally. But I do believe that Jake preferred that because we wanted to make the binding look like a snowboard binding. And so that's why when we launched SI, it had a high back to it, okay, with the clicks on the side and everything. And it instantly became the best-selling step-in binding. But it was like all the rest of them, it eventually became an evolutionary dead end. Probably one of the bigger reasons for it is because dealers how do you know how many boots to buy? Because the boots had to be specific to the binding. And you had to buy all these different sizes and everything. And dealers at the end of the year would be left with tons of size 6s and size 14s, that they had to pay for.
Right.
Like, what the heck were you going to do with them? And not enough
And
size
you have the
9.
boot and the binding.
Because, the boot and the binding were specific together. So it was a lot of financial things and planning things that made it difficult. Overall, people liked them, but they still were stiff. The team riders didn't ride them. And it just really didn't work out. So eventually it was sort of an evolutionary dead end, and they all kind of just filtered away, except in Japan. They never went away in Japan.
They're big in Japan.
The clicker and everything was still being sold in Japan for sure. So Burton stopped making them. And then it was just really kind of interesting. In the years that followed, it was hilarious because, everybody had this sort of negative feel and impression about step-in bindings. They're like, oh, step-ins, But whenever we would go and do super clinics with all of our top dealers and everything, some wag in the audience would always be like, when are you going to come up with the next step-in? And so
meanwhile, you're working on it in the back.
Well, it was funny for a while. Then literally one night, walking around Japan, me and this guy, Chris Cunningham, who's now, he's like global chief of product at Burton, we were like, half in the bag after a whole bunch of beers and everything. And we're like, well, what if we did what if we did? We have so much of a new capability, and we've got way different engineers now, and we have the rapid prototyping technology where we can test ride anything we want to. We didn't have that when we were developing
Yeah.
Step In the first time. We had the ability to make and try so many new things. And so he sort of took it to the bosses and everything and ran it by Jake, and Jake said, yeah, let's try. Okay. He's like, let's see what we can do. And so that's where they pulled 4 of us out of our regular work and everything like that. We built a little room in my workshop at Burton, and we had 4 months to just do nothing but study and experiment. And it was during the winter, so we could ride everything that we were making and just see what we could come up with. And they were so funny. They were like, oh, well, if you don't come up with anything, whatever, it's all right. And we all looked at each other and we were like, no, if we don't come up with anything, we're fired. That's just, yeah, no. And so it was really kind of funny, actually, when we sort of built a wall. We built a room while everybody else was out riding POW and Whistler for a winter sales meeting. And we're sitting back in Vermont, and it was crap and raining outside. And all we saw were Instagrams of everybody having a ball out in Whistler. And we're kind of like, is anybody working? And so we were a little frosted about that. So we headed over to Lowe's and we bought a bunch of 2x4s and some sheetrock and everything. And we built a wall with a locked door, and we walled off my whole workshop. And then we just cruised around to other offices in the buildings, and we stole chairs and couches and coffee tables and TVs. We just stole it all, and we built this beautiful clubhouse in my workshop, and
awesome.
It was great. These guys all came back, and they were like, all Burton emails were going out like, hey, where's my couch? And we're like,
it's in Whistler with your powder turns.
That's right. And because our room was locked and nobody was allowed in there. So we were, and when we eventually did get found out, we were just like, tough shit. We stole that stuff fair and square, man. And anyway,
and then you presented your binding. You're like, ta-da.
Well, and it was really interesting because when we all sat down and we looked at each other, we were like, okay, many of the best minds and engineers in snowboarding have tried to make this work. Burton, outside of Burton, so many different people have tried to make this work, and it hasn't been successful. Okay?
Yeah.
What are we going to do to make that successful? And so we started right out just basically sketching, CADing, prototyping, and just taking things up to the mountain and just trying so many different things. And that was what the modern prototyping situation of rapid selective laser sintering basically is it. It was the machine that we can prototype stuff and test ride it at 100% of what we would expect the finished product would be. Like this. Here is a step-on base plate. Okay. This is 3D printed.
It's crazy.
Okay. I made it for Jake to go to New Zealand in 2018. This is the first prototype of the EST step-on. And you can see it. It's all like hacked and everything. Like it was just electronically mashed together in CAD and then laser sintered. This is a fully rideable base plate. Okay.
Crazy.
And
yeah.
so this was what changed our time of developing this that we didn't have back in the 90s. Okay. When
Just
we were
being able to like laser print it. Not laser print it. Yeah. And test it within a day.
Overnight. No
Overnight.
kidding.
Yeah.
Overnight. Like literally we could go out and try things 2 or 3 times a week. Okay. And it allowed us to just let our minds really kind of run wild and try all kinds of different things. And other things that we did, we didn't have GoPros back then. Okay.
Yeah.
And so in our study and research, we're kind of like, well, what really makes a binding feel good and perform good? Like, what is it? And so I made this device, we called it the Halo. And it was this aluminum rig that would mount into the channel of the board. And it had a GoPro in the front, 2 on the sides, and 1 in the back. And
Crazy.
It would film just the boot and the binding as you were riding. And at the same time, the rider would be talking. We time-stamped the 2 together. And so we started being able to correlate what the rider was saying and feeling to what was actually happening and that we were seeing in the videos. Okay. And
High
so
tech.
this was, yeah, it was just really fun tech, right? And and the fact that we had Stowe right there, and we did that a lot. We even went so far as we were like, what if you didn't have a binding at all? And so we just took a boot and we screwed it to a snowboard, and we had one of our guys go ride that, and it
We're
was
back
really
to no backs.
yeah, totally. No, nothing. We literally pushed him through the lift line to get him onto the lift because he couldn't skate. So,
Oh my
and
gosh.
it was really really fun, and we were kind of like doing all kinds of wacky things, and other people that we worked with would be out at Stowe, and they'd be like, "What are you guys doing?" And we're like, "Shut up! Don't look! Go away!" You know. It was so in a lot of ways it was stressful, but it was really a lot of fun too. I mean, just the ability to be really honed in on a very specific project and just give it everything you had and learn and try to come up with something. And the whole time that we were doing it, it was right up against the wall of failure the whole time. I mean, it was just really scary. And it was
Yeah.
like it was intended to be launched in like 1 year. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, shit, something would fail in testing and we'd have to put it off. And I'm telling you, when you go in and tell Jake that you've got to like lose a product year on something like that, very uncomfortable conversation.
I guess you got good at failure. It was a lot of trial and error with everything, but like a
A lot of
lot of
failing.
people invested. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And the farther we got along, the more investment there was. So yeah, there was so many things like that along the way, Trish. Like even projects before that, we got our laser sintering machine back in 2002 at Burton. Okay,
Oh wow.
and it was something that the rest of the industry had no idea about, and we had been keeping a pretty good, close eye on that technology. And when we decided that that was the technology that we wanted, and the price tag was enormous. Okay,
Yeah.
and so we're sitting in Jake's office,
1 million.
darn close, not half. Yeah, seriously, and it was kind of like we're giving him the big sales pitch, and he keeps on going, how much? And we're like, well, but it'll do. How much?
And it'll
Okay,
make
and
a cappuccino.
yeah, right. It was like $500,000, and like he literally picked up boots and bindings and threw them at us. Okay, and we fled the room, and then a little bit later, he's like, all right, let's talk about this again. And we kind of went through it and everything, because when we first got the technology, we didn't realize that we were going to actually be able to ride what we could make out of it. And
Yeah,
then
crazy.
he
That's
greenlit
priceless.
it. Okay. And he was like, okay, but this better be good. And fortunately at the time, there was some advantages that were happening that allowed us to depreciate R&D investments, and all that financial stuff kind of came together
Yeah.
to allow us to do it, which kind of had to. And so we got the machine, we hired a guy to run it, and I became his wingman. And as we were figuring it out, we're just starting to work on the baseless, EST base plate, and we printed just this like hoop shape, and we got it out of the machine, and a couple of us were kind of like, and it didn't break in our hands, and we're like, all right. And then we went and we screwed it onto a board, and it was like I bunged some straps and screwed a high back to it, and we jumped around the shop, and we were like, all right. And we took it to the mountain and rode it the next day. And that was the first time we ever rode something that we made out of that machine.
That's
Okay.
awesome.
And another thing that allowed us to do was crazy is we, when we were making the channel boards, as we were developing the channel, we made the channels, instead of out of aluminum, we made them out of that plastic that came out of that machine.
Oh.
Okay. But what we found out was, as we pressed the boards, the plastic channel, the aluminum channel wasn't going to be a problem, but the plastic channel would collapse. And so the engineer made an I-beam in the center of that channel to hold it up. And then when they milled it out later on, there was all this just like leftover plastic crap and everything inside the channel. So you couldn't get the hardware in there to
Oh,
mount the
crazy.
bindings. And Jake basically was like, These guys threw the board at me at like 5:30 in the afternoon and said, "Hey, Jake wants to ride this tomorrow morning, and Stowe opens at 7:30." And he's like, "Jake wants to ride this tomorrow morning and we can't get the bindings on. Figure it out." And I had no tool to do this. Okay. And so, Trishy, this is one of my favorite things that I ever made, is this right here, which I've also kept. Let me see if I can get close enough. That is a tool that I made to clean the plastic out of the channel. Okay. You know what it is? It's a dime.
No, I can't even see it.
Can you see it now?
Oh, wait, what is it? Yeah. Okay.
It's a dime. I took a coin, a
crazy.
dime, and I used a Dremel tool to cut little notches along the edges, and I drilled a hole in the center of it, and I mounted it to a Dremel tool. And then I used that to clear out the plastic in the channel so I could get the hardware in there. I finished it up at about 9 o'clock at night. I ran the board out to Jake's house, left it with him, and he went and rode it the next day. So these are things that you get to do as you're developing new stuff. You get challenges thrown at you and you don't know how to do it, but you have to do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. What do you feel like is the most revolutionary? I mean, other than the high back, I feel like, but is there some piece of binding history or equipment or technology that just changed the game?
I mean, several things I think did. I mean, let's just say the development of the binding anyway. And there are going to be people that are going to argue with me about this. JG is still going to tell me that you don't need bindings. Okay. And I mean, the first board that I ever rode, that Snurfer right there, didn't have bindings on it.
Yeah.
Geez, that's a tough one, Trish, because so many different things happened that made riding develop both performance-wise and comfort-wise. Okay. I mean, in the early days, like Louis Fournier was riding bindings that he made himself on boards that he made himself, and he was wearing basically sneakers. They were like these Dionisi, driving shoes. Okay. And it was cold and it was Vermont and he was going 60 miles an hour wearing these things. And now the snowboard boot is the snowboard boot. I think making the binding systems over time so much more reliable and comfortable that more people could feel good about using them and having good days on snow. And I think that was more of a holistic thing that the whole sport did. And, we stubbed our toes along the way quite a bit. And, like you take a look at the bindings that Sims was making in the 1980s, they are effectively the modern binding. Okay.
Totally.
I mean, really, they were kind of ahead of their time. The folding high back, the two strap situation, that whole thing would kind of coalesced right there to become the binding that arguably we're still looking at as the strap binding today. Step-ins and convenience bindings. I see all kinds of new ones. This guy with the clue thing and other systems like the flow type systems. There's 2 or 3 new ones of those out there. The new ride binding that's like a convenience to get in that my girl Maggie worked on, and, all this creativity that's still helping. The whole idea is to create something that's comfortable, performs well, and is easy to use. So people will want to go snowboarding. And I think that is sort of the overarching idea of it, is to make it just enjoyable, make that whole sport enjoyable.
Yeah.
So yes, you can point to the high back and you can be like, wow, the high back. But I mean, if you want to take a step back before that, getting away from Fastex clips and coming up with the ratchet tongue and a buckle, that was pretty revolutionary just for convenience and performance all by itself. So there was these giant steps along the way, going from in the early days of snowboarding, every single different binding company had its own mounting system, with different holes and different stuff. And then it's just metric and fractional. And, the poor guys that lived that were like, we're Americans and we're going to use Gordon 20. And they finally had to give up, but, even the invention of the disc binding, okay, which some riders really, really weren't into it. Craig was not so into the invention of the disc binding because he thought that he was going to lose power in the corners of his binding when he rode.
Oh.
But it turned out to be a really awesome invention, which basically has made the 4x4 pattern that is ubiquitous in the industry today. Okay. Still to this day, there's very few people that are using anything other than that system.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the other thing I wanted to ask real quick is like, I mean, I never rode for Burton, but I always rode Burton bindings and Burton boots.
Yep.
Like, why? Like, that was not just me. That was like every pro rider there rode the Burton binding, and boot, essentially.
For a long time, okay, and there's probably people that are going to want to punch me in the face for saying this, but by cracky, I'm a believer. But for a long time, I really believed that Burton made the best performing binding available. And that is why so many pros rode it. And over time, other binding companies, many of the other binding companies have gone away. There is nobody that makes a bad binding anymore. There is no such thing. They're all good. And frankly, nobody makes a bad snowboard anymore. Whereas back in the 90s, there was a lot of crap out there.
We were riding planks.
What's that? Sorry?
We were riding planks, just like riding straight up
planks,
wood.
Yeah, riding planks and bindings that were like rigid and uncomfortable and didn't work well and hard to use and all this other kinds of stuff. Whereas, especially once Burton came up with the disc binding from, let's say, call it 94 to the early 2000s, it was the dominant binding. And it was also because Burton put so much R&D money into it. I mean, Burton was the company that was not afraid to spend money on tooling for new bindings to come up with new base plates that were better. And it was a very expensive, hard thing to do. And I used to yell at the board guys all the time that I said the sign out front should say Burton Snowboard Bindings because, we sell 1.35 bindings for every snowboard. And so that was just my way of knuckling up with them a lot.
That's
over
amazing.
time, the unions of the world, Flux, probably leaving other bindings out, Rome, they're all making good bindings. And it all really kind of depends on what's comfortable for the rider and what they want to use. And frankly, who they want to identify with. Okay, who does your soul fit? But for that time period, you are right. The Burton binding was the binding. And in my opinion, I think it still is. Okay. And,
totally,
we can argue over beers on that one all we want. And nobody is ever going to be right, but I can have my opinion. 5 years out of the company, and everything, I still think that Burton makes the best bindings. And that's just my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's awesome.
But it was really fun, I have to say, Tricia, to be involved in making that Burton binding the best binding. I worked with I don't want anybody to think that I'm claiming that it was me. I worked with an incredible team of riders and engineers and other product managers and everything. Everybody was so devoted to it and, worked their asses off to make it. And it was a real privilege for me to be a part of it, and to work with just riders that have great ideas. I used to love showing up to like Mount Hood. Okay, in the summertime, and I would bring 2 or 3 board bags and a whole bunch of other wheelie Burton bags and everything, and I would just bring binding pieces and parts and foam and buckles and all just kinds of stuff. And the young riders would like follow me around. I was the Pied Piper, and I would just like Jeffy Anderson. My gosh, that guy, I loved him so. I would show up and he'd be like, "What's in the bag?" And he would just tear into it, and he would just start putting his own things together. And that right there was just incredible how much I learned just sitting there and helping the riders build whatever they wanted to build. And that was amazing.
Yeah.
It was amazing. It was really cool.
So cool.
Yeah. I was very lucky to be a part of it.
Oh my gosh, aren't we all? And that's why we're sort of doing the podcast is to, like celebrate those days and the things that you kind of look back now and you're like, wow, we had so much fun, had such a cool crew, and we like did a thing, or we're witnessed a thing, or we're just like part of the thing.
And so to go back right to the beginning when we first started talking about that amazing trip that I took with those 3 dudes, right? There was one day we would go up in the morning, okay, and the campers and everything would all be up there and everything. And then in the early afternoon, all the campers would head back into town for lunch and everything. And it was me, Sione, and Ari and Terje left, okay, and they were filming Subject. And I was just down there working on Terje's gear on another board. Okay. And I just remember sitting up there on this private, beautiful half pipe up in the Swiss Italian Alps. We had Bob Marley playing on the speaker, echoing off the hills over here. And I was just like, I can't believe I'm here. Like, wow, and so that was a real moment for me. It was just like, holy cow, I just cannot believe I am here, doing this. I'm being paid
and making a difference.
And at the time I was hoping that I could make a difference. I was pretty early into it. I didn't know a lot about product development or anything like that, and I was just trying to do what I did, which was help the riders, and hopefully that would turn into a product that we could use.
Dude, amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
It is my pleasure and privilege, both.